The reek of stale cigarettes and desperation clung to the peeling paint of my apartment walls. It was the ghost of Mark, my ex, a phantom I couldn't seem to exorcise no matter how hard I scrubbed. Outside, the city wept a cold November rain, the slick streets reflecting the garish neon of a liquor store sign across the road. Inside, every shadow was a monster, every creak of the floorboards a footstep in the hall. Fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in my stomach that had been tightening for weeks, and tonight it was threatening to strangle me. I moved with the silent, frantic energy of a cornered animal, stuffing essentials into a worn duffel bag. A few changes of clothes for me, Lily's favorite worn teddy bear, the last of the cash from my nursing shifts, tucked into a side pocket. It wasn't much. It was everything. In the corner of the room, my daughter Lily slept in her travel cot, her small chest rising and falling in the oblivious peace of a 2-year-old. Her dark curls, so much like her father's, were a stark black against the pale pink of her blanket. Her father, not Mark, the feckless gambler who had brought this storm down on us, but a man I had never met. A man who was a ghost of a different sort. Dante. My sister Elena's whirlwind romance. A figure spoken of in hushed, breathless tones before she disappeared 2 years ago. He was a beautiful, dangerous secret she had kept, and now he was my only hope. I looked at Lily and saw his eyes, a startling shade of stormy gray that I only knew from the single photograph Elena had left behind. They were Dante's eyes. He was her father, and he had no idea she even existed. A heavy fist pounded on the apartment door, the wood groaning in its frame. "Ilara, we know you're in there. Open up. Petrov isn't a patient man." The voice was gravelly, laced with a brutal impatience that made my blood run cold. They were Mark's problem, his debt, but they had become my nightmare. I froze, my hand hovering over a stack of diapers. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The flimsy lock wouldn't hold for long. I snatched Lily from her cot, her small body warm and pliant against my chest as she stirred, murmuring in her sleep. I wrapped her blanket tighter around her, my movements swift and practiced from a dozen imagined scenarios just like this one. "One last chance, lady. We just want what we're owed." Another boom, louder this time, followed by the splintering crack of wood. There was no more time. Slinging the duffel bag over my shoulder, I moved to the window, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum. The fire escape was rusted and slick with rain, a skeletal ladder descending into the shadowy maw of the alley below. It was a terrifying drop, but the men behind the door were more terrifying still. Holding Lily tight against my chest with one arm, I fumbled with the window latch, my fingers clumsy with panic. The window squealed in protest as I forced it open, a blast of cold, wet air hitting my face. The sound of the apartment door giving way, of heavy footsteps and angry shouts, was the only motivation I needed. I swung one leg over the sill, then the other, my worn sneakers finding a precarious purchase on the wet metal. The alley was a chasm of darkness and filth, the stench of overflowing dumpsters rising to meet me. I descended as quickly as I dared, the iron groaning under my weight, my arms trembling with the strain of holding Lily. She was awake now, her gray eyes wide with confusion, but she didn't cry. It was as if she could sense the primal urgency of our flight. By the time I reached the bottom, my muscles were screaming and my lungs were burning. I didn't pause. I ran, melting into the deeper shadows at the mouth of the alley, glancing back just once to see 2 large, menacing silhouettes in the lit window of my now former home. They hadn't seen me. Not yet. I pulled my thin jacket tighter, shielding Lily from the worst of the downpour, and sprinted toward the distant glow of a main thoroughfare. In my pocket, my fingers closed around a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper. It was a note from Elena, left for me before she vanished. It contained a single address, a name, and a desperate, cryptic instruction. If you're ever in real trouble, the kind you can't run from, go here. Ask for Dante Moretti. Tell him you're my sister. Tell him about the promise. I had never understood what promise she meant. I had been too afraid to find out. The name Dante Moretti was tied to whispers of organized crime, of power that operated in the city's deepest shadows. To go to him was to step into a world from which there was likely no return. But Mark's debts had brought that world to my doorstep anyway. Now, running through the rain-slicked streets of a city that felt alien and hostile, with my sister's orphaned child in my arms, I had no other choice. I was in the kind of trouble you couldn't run from. A taxi slowed as I flagged it down, its headlights cutting through the gloom. I slid into the back, the vinyl seat cold and cracked. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, taking in my disheveled appearance, the sleeping child, the desperation etched on my face. I gave him the address from Elena's note, my voice barely a whisper. It was in the city's most affluent district, a place of high walls and old money, a world away from my dingy walk-up. The driver grunted, a flicker of surprise in his expression, before pulling away from the curb. As the taxi moved through the city, the landscape began to change. The grimy storefronts and tenement buildings gave way to manicured lawns and stately homes set far back from the road. The rain softened to a drizzle, as if even the weather knew to be more polite in this part of town. My fear didn't lessen, it just changed its flavor. From the raw terror of imminent violence to a deep, chilling dread of the thick unknown. I was about to knock on a devil's door, and I was bringing him his daughter as a peace offering. The taxi finally stopped before a set of immense wrought iron gates. Beyond them, a long, winding driveway snaked through a forest of ancient oak trees, leading to a house that was less a home and more a fortress. It was a monolithic structure of dark stone and sharp angles, windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. It swallowed the light, radiating an aura of cold, untouchable power. I paid the driver with a significant portion of my escape fund, my hand shaking as I passed him the bills. He drove away quickly, leaving me and Lily alone in the oppressive silence, standing before the gates like supplicants at a forbidden temple. There was an intercom set into the stone pillar. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and pressed the button. A moment of static, and then a voice, smooth and impassive. "Yes?" It was male, devoid of any discernible emotion. I need to see Dante Moretti," I stammered, my voice sounding small and weak against the imposing backdrop. "My name is Alara. I'm Elena's sister." I paused, my heart pounding. "Please, it's urgent." There was a long silence on the other end, so long I thought he had dismissed me. Then a low buzz, and the heavy gates began to swing inward with a silent, menacing grace. The voice came again, just as flat as before. "Walk to the front door. Do not deviate from the path." The line went dead. I clutched Lily tighter, her small head nestled into the crook of my neck, and began the long walk up the driveway. The air here was different, cleaner, scented with pine and wet earth. It felt like a different country. The house grew larger with every step, a sleeping giant of stone and shadow. I felt like I was walking into the belly of the beast. By the time I reached the massive, carved wooden doors, My nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, one of the doors swung open. A man stood there, framed in the warm, golden light from within. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his face a mask of disciplined neutrality. He had to be the man from the intercom. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on Lily's sleeping form before returning to my face. His eyes were dark and watchful, missing nothing. "Mr. Moretti is not expecting visitors," he said, his voice the same calm, controlled baritone from the speaker. It wasn't a question or a refusal, just a statement of fact. "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling, "but I have to see him. It's about his daughter." The words felt heavy and strange on my tongue. The man's stoic expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker, a subtle tightening around his eyes, that told me my words had landed with the force of a physical blow. He stared at Lily again, his professional calm momentarily disrupted. He seemed to be searching her small face for a sign, a confirmation. He must have found it, because he stepped back, holding the door open wider. "Come in," he said, his voice now holding a new, unreadable inflection. I stepped over the threshold, moving from the cold, wet night into a world of impossible opulence. The foyer was vast, larger than my entire apartment, with a soaring ceiling from which a crystal chandelier hung like a captured star. The floor was polished marble, reflecting the warm light in a dizzying pattern. A grand staircase swept upwards into the shadows of the second floor. The air smelled of old leather, wood polish, and money. It was silent, the kind of deep, insulated silence that wealth buys. The man in the suit, Luca, as I would later learn his name, was closed, the heavy door behind me, the sound echoing in the cavernous space, sealing me inside. "Wait here," he commanded softly, before turning and ascending the staircase, his footsteps making no sound on the thick runner. Left alone with a sleeping Lily in the grand, intimidating hall, I felt the full weight of my decision crash down on me. I had run from one danger straight into the heart of another. These were not good men. The sterile perfection of the house, the absolute authority of the man who had just left, the whispers that clung to the name Moretti, it all screamed of a power that was ruthless and absolute. I clutched my daughter, my only shield, and prayed I hadn't just made the biggest mistake of my life. What if he didn't believe me? What if he thought it was a trick, a trap? What if he simply didn't care? My sister was gone, vanished. For all I knew, this man, this Dante Moretti, was the reason why. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't Luca. The man who descended was an embodiment of the house itself, dark, powerful, and impeccably composed. He wore simple black trousers and a charcoal gray cashmere sweater that did nothing to soften the hard lines of his body. He moved with a predator's fluid grace, his presence filling the vast space, commanding it. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, his face a collection of sharp angles and stark planes, a strong jaw, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. And then I saw his eyes. They were the same stormy gray as his daughter's, but where hers were filled with innocent wonder, his were cold, hard chips of granite. They held a chilling intelligence and a profound weariness, the eyes of a man who had seen too much and forgone all illusions. This was Dante Moretti. His gaze swept over me, a quick, dismissive appraisal, before landing on Lily, and in that moment, the entire world seemed to stop. The icy control in his face fractured. His eyes, those cold granite eyes, widened almost imperceptibly. He stared at the sleeping child in my arms, his focus so intense it was almost a physical touch. He saw her dark curls. He saw the shape of her face. He saw his own eyes reflected back at him in miniature. The air crackled with a sudden, unbearable tension. He took the last few steps slowly, deliberately, his gaze never leaving her. He stopped a few feet from me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint, clean scent of expensive soap and something uniquely masculine. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. It was rougher than I expected, like aged whiskey in gravel. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. "What did you say to Luca?" I swallowed, my throat dry. I said your daughter is asking for you." I had twisted the words, a desperate lie born of panic. But as he looked at her, his expression a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and something I couldn't name. Something that looked terrifyingly like hope. I realized it might be the most profound truth I had ever spoken. "Elena?" he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. His eyes finally lifted, from Lily to meet mine, and they were no longer cold. They were burning. "Where is she?" The question was raw, stripped of all his careful control. "I don't know," I answered honestly, my voice shaking. "She disappeared. 2 years ago. She left a note. She told me to come to you if I was ever in trouble. She told me she was pregnant." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing violently. He took a step closer, his gaze dropping back to Lily. He reached out a hand, slowly, as if approaching a wild, easily startled creature. His fingers, long and elegant but calloused, gently brushed a curl from Lily's forehead. At his touch, a shiver went through me, a strange mix of fear and an electric awareness of his proximity. "Who are you running from?" he asked, his voice regaining some of its steel, but the fire in his eyes remained. The question pulled me back to the present, to the immediate threat. "Men, they're looking for me, because of my ex-boyfriend Mark. He owes them money. A lot of money." I was rambling, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. They were breaking down my door. We got out through the fire escape. I didn't know where else to go. Dante's expression hardened into a mask of cold fury. It wasn't directed at me, but at the unseen threat, the faceless men who had dared to endanger this child. His child. He turned his head slightly. "Luca," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of an iron command. The other man materialized from the shadows as if he had been there all along. "Find out who this Mark is. Find out who he owes. I want names. I want locations. And I want the security footage from the alley behind her building for the last hour." Luca simply nodded. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." He pulled out a phone and began tapping silently, his efficiency a testament to years of practice. Dante turned his attention back to me. His stormy eyes bored into mine, searching, assessing. "They will not touch you again," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a decree, a statement of fact from a man who had the power to bend reality to his will. "You and the child," he continued, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it flickered to Lily. "You are not safe here. This house is known. We're leaving." The finality in his tone sent another jolt of fear through me. This was happening too fast. I had come for help, but I was being swept up in a tide of power I couldn't possibly comprehend, let alone control. "Leaving? Leaving to go where?" I asked, my voice small. To a place where they cannot find you, he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. A place where you will be protected. It sounded like a rescue. It felt like a kidnapping. He gestured toward the back of the house. Luca will get you a coat. It's cold. He didn't wait for my agreement. He turned and strode toward a side door, expecting me to follow. I hesitated for only a second, looking down at Lily's sleeping face. Her safety was all that mattered. I had stepped into the lion's den, and now the lion was claiming us as his own. I had no choice but to follow. Luca appeared at my side, holding a soft black cashmere coat. It was ridiculously luxurious, warmer and more expensive than anything I had ever owned. I slipped it on over my thin, damp jacket, the fabric a small comfort against the chilling reality of my situation. He then led me through a series of corridors that were as opulent and impersonal as the main hall, our footsteps silent on antique rugs. We emerged into a cavernous underground garage, a pristine, brightly lit space that housed a fleet of sleek, black vehicles. They looked less like cars and more like armored beasts, polished to a mirror shine. Dante was waiting for us beside a large sedan that was longer and more imposing than the others. He opened the back door himself. "Get in," he said. I slid onto the plush leather seat, the interior smelling rich and new. The space was enormous. Dante got in after me, sitting on the opposite side, creating a chasm of tense space between us. Luca took the driver's seat, and another man, built like a refrigerator, sat in the passenger seat. The doors closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing us in a bubble of profound silence. The engine purred to life, a low, powerful rumble, and the car glided smoothly out of the garage into the night. I watched the monolithic house recede behind us, a dark fortress disappearing into the trees. I had been inside for less than an hour, but my life had been irrevocably altered. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The city lights blurred into streaks of color through the tinted windows. Lily shifted in my arms, her warmth a grounding presence in the surreal, terrifying situation. I risked a glance at Dante. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on his daughter, an expression of raw, unguarded fascination on his face. It was the look of a man seeing a miracle. The hard lines of his face seemed to soften, the coldness in his eyes replaced by a burning, protective fire. He was seeing not just a child, but a legacy, a second chance, a piece of the woman he had lost. In that moment, he was not a monster or a mafia boss. He was just a father. "She looks like Elena," he said, his voice a low murmur, almost to himself. "But she has my eyes." I nodded, unable to speak. The quiet intimacy of the confession felt more dangerous than any overt threat. It was a bridge across the chasm between us, an acknowledgement of the shared blood that now bound our fates together. I wondered again what had happened to my sister. Had she run from this man? Or had this man's world swallowed her whole? And which of those fates was worse? The car finally slowed, pulling into a private underground entrance of a sleek, modern skyscraper that pierced the clouds. The garage was empty except for our vehicle. This was a place of anonymity and discretion. "We're here," Dante announced as the car came to a stop. Luca was already out, opening my door. We were escorted to a private elevator, which opened directly into the apartment. My breath caught in my chest. If the mansion was a fortress of old-world power, this was a palace in the sky. The apartment was a sprawling penthouse that occupied the entire top floor. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city's glittering expanse. The furniture was minimalist and modern, all clean lines and expensive fabrics in shades of charcoal, cream, and silver. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly soulless. It was the most luxurious prison I had ever seen. "This will be your home for now," Dante said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, open-plan living area. "It is secure. No one can get to you here." He walked over to the wall of windows, looking out over the city that was now his domain, laid out like a map at his feet. "There are clothes in the closets. The kitchen is stocked. Anything you or the child need, you tell Luca. It will be provided." He turned back to face me, his expression once again controlled, impassive. The brief vulnerability I had seen in the car was gone, locked away behind his carefully constructed walls. "My child's name is Lily," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I needed him to see her as a person, not just a symbol or a possession. "Her name is Lily." Dante's gaze dropped to her, and for a fleeting moment, the mask slipped again. "Lily," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. He nodded slowly. "It's a beautiful name." He took a step toward me, closing some of the distance between us. "I need to know everything, Alara. Everything about the last 2 years. Everything about Elena. And everything about the men who are hunting you." His proximity was overwhelming. He was a force of nature, a vortex of power and intensity that threatened to pull me under. I held Lily tighter, my only anchor in this storm. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes, those captivating, dangerous gray eyes, held mine. "Because she is my daughter," he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive growl. "And what is mine I protect. That now includes you. You brought her to me. You kept her safe. For that, you have my protection. Whether you want it or not." The words hung in the air, a declaration and a sentence. I was his responsibility, his property. I was safe from the wolves outside, but I was now locked in the cage with the lion. The next few days passed in a surreal haze of comfort and confinement. The penthouse was a gilded cage of the highest order. The closets were filled with designer clothes in my size, soft fabrics and elegant cuts that felt alien on my skin. The pantry and refrigerator were restocked daily by silent, efficient staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. There were toys for Lily, beautiful handcrafted wooden blocks, and plush animals that she immediately adored. We had everything we could possibly need and more, yet the heavy, soundproof door to the hallway remained locked from the outside. I had a phone, but it was a new one, provided by Dante. It had only 2 numbers programmed into it, his and Luca's. My old life, my friends, the world I knew, had been completely severed. Dante was a constant, unsettling presence. He didn't stay at the penthouse, but he visited every day. He would arrive in the evening, after Lily was asleep, his face etched with the weariness of a man who waged wars in boardrooms and back alleys. He would go to her room first, a small, beautifully decorated nursery he'd had prepared overnight, and stand over her crib, just watching her breathe. The look on his face in those quiet moments was a complex tapestry of fierce love, profound regret, and a possessiveness that was terrifying in its intensity. He was a man staking a claim on a part of his soul he never knew was missing. Then he would come and find me. We would sit in the vast living room, the city lights twinkling below us like a fallen constellation, and he would question me. His interrogations were quiet, methodical, and relentless. He wanted every detail about Elena's last few months, every conversation, every mood swing. He wanted to know about Mark, about the debt, about the men who had come for me. I told him everything, my stories filling the sterile silence of the penthouse. I spoke of Elena's joy and her fear, her excitement about her mysterious lover, and her growing paranoia before she disappeared. I described Mark's downward spiral into gambling, the escalating threats, the suffocating fear. Dante listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask, his gray eyes absorbing every detail, filing it away. He was a hunter gathering intelligence, and I was his primary source. One night, after a particularly grueling session of questions, I found the courage to ask one of my own. "What happened to her, Dante? What really happened to my sister?" He was standing by the window, his back to me, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He swirled the contents, the ice clinking softly. "I don't know," he said, his voice flat. "One day she was here, the next she was gone. No note, no call. Her things were gone. She just and vanished." He turned to face me, and in the dim light, I could see the raw pain he kept so carefully hidden. I searched for her. My men turned this city upside down. We found nothing. It was like she ceased to exist. "Did you love her?" The question was out before I could stop it. It was too personal, too intimate. His jaw tightened. "She was important to me," he said, the careful, evasive answer of a man who refused to be vulnerable. "She was carrying my child. That made her the most important person in my world. I failed to protect her." The self-recrimination in his voice was stark. "I will not fail again." His gaze on me was heavy with the weight of that vow. He was projecting his failure with Elena onto me and Lily. We were his chance at redemption, and he would chain us to him with bonds of safety and steel to ensure he succeeded this time. It was during one of these tense evenings that he finally laid out his terms, the conditions of my gilded captivity. "Luca has dealt with your Mark problem," he began, his tone cold and clinical. "The debt has been paid. Mark has been persuaded to relocate. Far away. He will not trouble you again." A chill went through me. I didn't dare ask what persuaded entailed. I didn't want to know. The men he owed money to have also been addressed. "They understand now that you and Lily are under my protection. An attack on you is an attack on me." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving my face. But they were merely the symptoms of the disease. The real threat remains. "What threat?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The people who took Elena," he said, his voice dropping, becoming harder. "I believe they are the same people who sent those thugs to your door. Mark's debt was just a convenient excuse, a way to find you. They must have learned about Lily." My blood ran cold. "Who are they?" "A rival family," he said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "The Falcons. An old enemy. Taking Elena was a message to me 2 years ago. A line I thought they wouldn't cross. I was wrong. Now that they know about my daughter, she is their ultimate prize. Their ultimate leverage against me. The penthouse, my safe fortress, suddenly felt like a target. His protection wasn't just possessiveness, it was a grim necessity. "So what happens now?" I asked, the enormity of the situation threatening to crush me. "Now," he said, setting his glass down with a decisive click, "I end them. I will remove the threat of the Falcanes from our lives, permanently." He took a step closer, his presence commanding, absolute. "And while I do that, you and Lily will stay here. You will not leave. You will not contact anyone. You will do exactly as I say. This is not a negotiation, Alara. This is the only way I can guarantee your safety. Your lives are in my hands now." He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the ruthless words he had just spoken. "Do you understand?" I could only nod, my heart hammering in my chest. I was a pawn in a war I never knew existed. My only protection, the very man who was the cause of the danger. That night, he shared a piece of his past, a sliver of the man behind the mask. Perhaps he saw the terror in my eyes and felt the need to offer some kind of justification, some explanation for the monster he was. We were sitting in silence when he began to speak, his voice low and distant, as if recounting a story from another lifetime. "When I was a boy," he started, his gaze fixed on the city below, "my mother was a beautiful woman, kind, gentle. She was not from this life. My father took her from her world and brought her into his. He loved her, in his own way, but he could not protect her from his enemies." He paused, the silence stretching, thick with unspoken pain. "They came for her, not to kill her, to send a message to him. They hurt her, broke her spirit. She was never the same after that, a ghost in her own home. My father's power couldn't undo the damage." He turned to look at me, his gray eyes blazing with a cold, ancient fire. I was 15. I watched her fade away, and I swore to myself that I would never be that weak. I would never let anyone I cared about be used as a weapon against me. I would build walls of steel and fire around them. I would become a monster to keep the other monsters at bay. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and shocking. It didn't excuse the man he had become, but it explained him. It explained the obsessive protection, the ruthless control, the gilded cage. He was a man, haunted by the ghost of his mother, desperately trying to prevent history from repeating itself with me and his daughter. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than fear for him. It was a dangerous, unwelcome sliver of empathy. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted over the next few days. The silent, efficient staff were replaced by more of Luca's men, large, grim-faced guards, who stood sentinel outside the door and in the elevator lobby. The sense of being in a fortress intensified. Dante's visits became shorter, more clipped. He was a man preparing for war. I would see him on the phone, pacing the length of the living room, speaking in rapid, guttural Italian, his voice a low, dangerous weapon. The name Falcone was a recurring curse. He was mobilizing his army, and I was in the eye of the storm. One evening, he arrived later than usual. He looked different. He was wearing a dark suit, perfectly tailored as always, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a deadly focus in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. He came straight to me, bypassing his usual ritual of checking on Lily. He took my hands in his grip firm and cool. "I have to go out," he said, his voice low and steady. "I have a meeting. I may be gone for some time." I knew what a meeting meant. This was it. This was the confrontation, the war. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me, not just for myself or for Lily, but for him. The thought was unexpected and deeply unsettling. "Be careful," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by something else, something warmer. He lifted one of my hands to his lips and pressed a light kiss to my knuckles. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender, so at odds with the violence he was about to unleash, that it stole my breath. "I have too much to come home to now, to be anything else," he said, his gray eyes locking with mine, and then he was gone. Luca and 2 other guards remained in the penthouse with me and Lily. The silence he left behind was heavier, more charged than his presence had been. I went to the window and watched the city lights, my mind filled with images of violence and shadow. I was praying for the safety of a killer, a mafia boss, a monster, because my life, and the life of my daughter, depended on him coming back. The hours crawled by. I tried to read, to watch television, to do anything to distract myself, but my mind was a vortex of anxiety. I checked on Lily a dozen times, her peaceful sleep, a stark contrast to my inner turmoil. Luca remained by the door, a silent, stoic statue. He offered no information, and I knew better than to ask. This was Dante's world, and in it, I was merely a protected asset, not a confidant. Sometime after midnight, I must have drifted off on the sofa, exhausted by the relentless tension. I was woken by a soft touch on my shoulder. My eyes snapped open, my body instantly rigid with alarm. It was Dante. He was kneeling in front of the sofa, his face just inches from mine. He was back. He was alive. The relief that washed over me was so potent it made me dizzy. He looked exhausted, the skin stretched tight over the bones of his face. There was a dark bruise high on his cheekbone and a small, clean cut just above his eyebrow that he had obviously tried to clean. His suit jacket was gone, and the cuffs of his white shirt were stained with something dark. Blood. My stomach clenched. "Is it?" I couldn't finish the sentence. He nodded, his expression grim. "It's over," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "The Falcons will no longer be a problem for anyone." The finality in his words was absolute and chilling. He had gone out into the night and erased his enemies. He had waged a war and won. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing against my skin. The simple gesture was electric, intimate. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You and Lily." I kept my promise. I looked into his eyes, the stormy gray depths that held a universe of violence and pain, but now, directed at me, also held a fierce, unwavering protectiveness. The war was over. The external threats were gone, and in the silent, sterile penthouse, with the sleeping city at our feet, a new, far more complicated conflict was just beginning. The barriers between us, erected by fear and circumstance, were starting to crumble. With the threat of the Falcons neutralized, the suffocating tension that had gripped the penthouse for days finally dissipated. The extra guards vanished as silently as they had appeared. The air itself felt lighter, the silence less oppressive. But the adrenaline that had kept me going, the fear that had been my constant companion, receded, leaving behind a profound emotional exhaustion and a new, unsettling awareness. The danger from the outside was gone, but I was still here, in this gilded cage, with the man who had put me in it, the man who had killed for me, the man who was my daughter's father. The lines had blurred so completely. I no longer knew where the danger ended and the safety began. Dante was different now. The grim wartime focus was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful stillness. He started spending more time at the penthouse, not just visiting in the evenings, but working from the small office off the living room during the day. He was a constant presence, a dark, powerful planet whose gravitational pull was steadily warping the fabric of my small universe. He started joining me for meals, sitting across from me at the huge dining table, the silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. And he started to interact with Lily. At first, it was tentative. He would watch her play from a distance, his expression a mixture of awe and uncertainty. He, a man who commanded a criminal empire, seemed utterly terrified of this tiny human who shared his blood. One afternoon, Lily was toddling around the living room, babbling to her teddy bear. She stumbled, as toddlers do, and fell, letting out a surprised cry more of indignation than pain. Before I could even move from my chair, Dante was there. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt, scooping her up into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man of his size and nature. He held her against his chest, murmuring to her in soft, soothing Italian, his large hand protectively cradling her head. Lily, who was usually shy with strangers, calmed instantly. She looked up at him with his own gray eyes, reached out a tiny hand, and patted his bruised cheek. "Boom," she said solemnly. A ghost of a smile touched Dante's lips, a rare, startlingly beautiful sight. It transformed his harsh features, making him look younger, less formidable. "Yes, little one," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Boom." He held her for a long time, just rocking her gently, and I watched them, my heart a confused, aching knot in my chest. That evening, after Lily was asleep, the fragile peace between us shattered. I was standing by the window, looking down at the river of headlights flowing through the city streets, feeling more trapped than ever. The immediate threat was gone. So why was I still here? "She called me Dada today." Dante's voice came from behind me, soft and laced with wonder. I turned to face him. He was leaning against the doorframe of the living room, watching me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "What happens now, Dante?" I asked, my voice tight. "The Falcons are gone. Mark is gone. We're safe. Are you just going to keep us locked up here forever?" He pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly toward me until he was standing so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. His scent, clean and masculine, enveloped me. "I told you," he said, his voice a low, intense rumble. "I protect what is mine. I am not yours." I shot back, my fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of defiance. "And Lily is not a possession. She is a person. She is my daughter," he countered, his voice dropping even lower, becoming possessive, dangerous. "My blood, and you are her mother. That makes you essential." He reached out, his hand coming to rest on the curve of my waist. His touch was light, but it sent a shock wave through my system. My breath hitched. "I failed her, mother," he said, his eyes burning into mine. "I will not fail you." The raw vulnerability in that admission disarmed me. The walls I had so carefully constructed around my heart began to crumble. This man was a killer, a criminal, a monster. But he was also a father, grieving and fiercely protective, trying to atone for his past sins. I saw the boy who watched his mother fade away, the man who searched desperately for the woman he'd lost, the father who had just discovered the most precious thing in his world. "Dante," I whispered, his name a plea and a surrender, all at once. He lowered his head, his forehead resting against mine. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and soft. "Alara," he breathed my name like a prayer. The space between us vanished. His other hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. My own hands, of their own volition, came to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was the heart of a predator, but it was beating for me, for his daughter. The world outside, the city lights, the sterile penthouse, it all faded away. There was only the tension, the heat, the undeniable pull between us. He had saved us, protected us, and in doing so, had bound us to him with invisible chains of gratitude and obligation. But in this moment, it felt like something more, something deeper. something terrifyingly real. His lips met mine. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, a raw expression of all the pain, fear, and longing that had been simmering between us for days. It was a kiss of possession, a brand of ownership, but it was also filled with a startling tenderness. It was the kiss of a man starved for a connection, for a softness in his brutal world. I should have pulled away. I should have fought him, but I didn't. I melted against him, my body betraying every rational thought in my head. I kissed him back with a desperation that matched his own, channeling all my fear, my confusion, my gratitude, and my terrifying burgeoning attraction into the act. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, the air crackling with what had just passed between us. He rested his forehead against mine again, his eyes closed. "Stay," he whispered, his voice ragged. "Don't just stay because you have to. Stay because you want to. Choose to stay with me." The next morning, Dante was gone when I woke up. A part of me, the part that was still terrified of him and the world he inhabited, was relieved. But another, larger part felt a pang of parriame, disappointment. The kiss had changed everything. It had shattered the carefully defined roles of captor and captive, protector and protected. It had created a new, terrifyingly intimate dynamic between us. I spent the day in a daze, watching Lily play, my mind replaying the feel of his lips on mine, the raw emotion in his voice when he asked me to stay. He was offering me a choice, or at least the illusion of one. He returned that evening and found me packing the same worn duffel bag I had arrived with. I was neatly folding Lily's clothes, my movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in the doorway of my room, his body rigid, his face a thunderous mask. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I didn't look at him. "You said the threat was gone," I replied, my voice calm, though my heart was pounding. "You said we were safe. So, we're leaving. You can provide for Lily. From a distance, like you said. We'll be fine." It was a bluff. I had nowhere to go, no money, no future, but I had to know. I had to know if the choice was real. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands closing over my shoulders, forcing me to turn and face him. His grip was tight, almost painful. "There is no we," he bit out, his gray eyes blazing with a furious, wounded light. "There is no life for you out there without me. Do you think the world just forgets? The shadows have long memories. You are my daughter's mother. You will always be a target. You will always be a vulnerability. The only place you are safe is by my side." "So it wasn't a choice at all," I said, my voice breaking. "It was just another command." "No," he said, his voice softening, his grip easing. He lifted a hand to my face, his fingers tracing the path of a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "The choice is real, Ilara. You can walk out that door. I will not stop you. I will have my men watch you from a distance, keep you safe as best I can. I will deposit $1 million into an account. For you, you will never have to worry about money again." He paused, his eyes searching mine, pleading. "Or you can stay here, with me. And you will never have to worry about anything again. You will have more than money. You will have a home. Lily will have her father. And you will have me." He was laying his kingdom at my feet, a kingdom of shadows and blood, but a kingdom nonetheless. He was offering me a life of unimaginable luxury and absolute security. The price was my freedom, my old life, my very soul. I looked into his eyes and saw the monster, the killer. But I also saw the lonely man, the protective father, the man who kissed me with a desperate, heartbreaking tenderness. I thought of the cold, terrified nights in my shabby apartment, the constant fear, the struggle to make ends meet. I thought of Lily, of giving her a life without fear, a life with a father who would burn down the world to keep her safe. Was it so wrong to choose safety? To choose the devil I knew? "I can't be one of your possessions, Dante," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I can't be another beautiful thing you keep in your cage." "Never," he said, his voice fierce. "You would be my partner, my queen." He leaned in, his lips brushing against mine, a soft, promising touch. "Choose us, Alara. Choose this life. Choose me." And in that moment, looking at the life he was offering, the safety, the security, and the fierce, possessive love of this dangerous, complicated man, I made my choice. I leaned into his touch, my body giving him the answer before my lips could form the words. I chose the gilded cage. I chose the lion. I chose to stay. "Yes," I whispered against his mouth. "I'll stay." The relief that washed over his face was so profound. It was like watching the sun break through a storm. He swept me into his arms, his mouth capturing mine in a kiss that was no longer desperate, but triumphant. It was a kiss that sealed a pact, a promise, a beginning, the transition from the sterile penthouse to the grand, imposing mansion was a journey of only a few miles, but it felt like crossing into another dimension. The mansion, which had once seemed like a cold, intimidating fortress, now felt different. With Dante by my side, and with the conscious choice to be there, it began to feel like a sanctuary. It was still vast and opulent, but now I saw the personal touches I had missed before. A worn leather armchair by the fire in the library, a collection of antique maps on the wall of his study, photographs of a laughing young woman with Dante's eyes, his sister, he told me, lost to a rival's car bomb years ago. The house was not just a monument to his power, it was a mausoleum of his griefs, and he was finally letting me inside. He gave me a suite of rooms that overlooked the sprawling back gardens. They were decorated in soft creams and blues, a stark contrast to the dark, masculine tones of the rest of the house. "I wanted you to have a space that was yours," he explained, standing awkwardly in the doorway as I took it all in. "A place to feel at peace." Lily had her own room adjoining mine, a wonderland of soft toys and whimsical murals that Dante had commissioned overnight. He was trying, in his own commanding, steamroller way, to build a home for us, to create a world so perfect we would never want to leave. Our relationship evolved in the quiet moments. In the evenings, after Lily was asleep, we would sit in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth. He would tell me about his business, sanitizing the brutal realities, but revealing the complexities of the empire he controlled. In turn, I told him about my life, my dreams of being a pediatric nurse, my love for my sister, the simple, ordinary world I had left behind. We were two people from different universes, trying to find a common language. The physical intimacy between us grew as well, moving from the desperate, claiming kisses of the penthouse to a slower, more tender exploration. He was a man of immense control, but with me, he was learning to be vulnerable. He would hold me through the night, his body a warm, solid shield against the world, as if he feared I might vanish like Elena had if he let go. One afternoon, I found him in the garden, a place he rarely went. He was standing by a stone bench, staring at a small, unassuming rosebush that was stubbornly clinging to its last few blooms, despite the encroaching winter. "This was my mother's," he said, as I approached, his voice quiet. "She loved these roses. After she changed, this was the only place she seemed to find any peace. I was a boy. I would sit with her for hours right here. She wouldn't speak, just touch the petals." He reached out and gently touched a velvet red petal, his calloused fingers surprisingly delicate. "When I took over from my father, I had the rest of the gardens redesigned, made more formal. But I kept this. I told the gardeners that if this bush ever died, they would be buried with it." He turned to me, a sad, self-deprecating smile on his lips. Even my sentimentality is a threat. I stepped closer and took his hand, lacing my fingers through his. "It's not a threat, Dante. It's a promise. It's a memory. It's the part of you that remembers how to be gentle." He looked down at our joined hands, then back at me, his gray eyes filled with an emotion that made my heart ache. "You make me remember," he said, his voice rough. "You and Lily." He lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to the palm, his gaze never leaving mine. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, a quiet acknowledgement that we were building something real amidst the foundations of his violent world. The true turning point, the moment I knew there was no going back, came a few weeks later. We were having a quiet dinner, just the two of us, in the formal dining room. Lily was asleep upstairs, and the house was silent except for the clinking of our silverware. Dante seemed distracted all evening, a thoughtful, almost nervous energy about him that was completely out of character. After the plates were cleared, he didn't suggest we move to the library as usual. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Alara," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "What we have, this life we are building, I want it to be permanent. I want it to be official." He slid from his chair and knelt on the thick Persian rug beside me, my breath caught in my throat. He pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was the most beautiful ring I had ever seen. It was a vintage piece, a large emerald-cut diamond, flanked by smaller sapphires, set in platinum. It was elegant, timeless, and impossibly beautiful. "This was my grandmother's," he said, his voice low and earnest. "She gave it to my mother. My father was supposed to give it to me to one day give to my wife, to the woman who would be the mother of the next Moretti generation." His eyes, those stormy gray eyes that had once terrified me, were now filled with a hopeful, nervous light. "Lily is that generation, and you are her mother, my partner, my queen. Alara, will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the glittering diamond. Just a few months ago, I was running for my life, a terrified single mother with nothing to her name. Now, the most powerful man in the city was on one knee, offering me his name, his future, his heart. I thought of the fear and the violence, but I also thought of the safety, the tenderness, the fierce devotion. I thought of Lily and the father who adored her. I thought of this impossible, dangerous man, and the surprising love that had grown between us. This wasn't the life I had ever imagined for myself. It was better. It was real. "Yes," I whispered, the tears finally spilling over and tracing paths down my cheeks. "Yes, Dante, I'll marry you." A brilliant, breathtaking smile spread across his face, the kind of genuine, unguarded smile I had only seen once before. He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood and pulled me to my feet, wrapping his arms around me and lifting me off the ground, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was filled with joy, relief, and the promise of a future I was no longer afraid of. The gilded cage had become a home. The monster had become my family. Our life settled into a new rhythm, a strange and beautiful blend of the mundane and the magnificent. Mornings were for Lily, for lazy breakfasts in the sun-drenched kitchen and walks through the sprawling gardens, a silent guard always trailing at a discreet distance. Dante would join us whenever he could, shedding his identity as the city's dark king to become just Dada, the man who would get down on the floor to build block towers and make silly faces. In those moments, watching him with our daughter, the last vestiges of my fear melted away, replaced by a love so fierce and deep it felt like it had always been there. The final scene that cemented my new reality, that quieted the last whispers of doubt in my soul, happened on a crisp spring afternoon. Several months had passed since his proposal. The wedding was being planned a small private affair, Dante insisted, for security reasons. I was sitting on the stone bench in his mother's rose garden, the bush now bursting with new life, its fragrant red blooms a vibrant splash of color. Lily was taking her first confident steps on the soft grass, her laughter like tiny bells in the quiet air. I watched her, my heart swelling with a happiness I had never thought possible. I felt his presence before I saw him. Dante came and stood behind the bench, his hands coming to rest on my shoulders, his thumbs gently massaging the tension from my neck. I leaned back against his solid frame, my head resting on his chest, my new ring catching the afternoon sunday. He was silent for a long moment, just watching his daughter explore her world. "She's happy here," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "Yes," I said, my voice soft. "We both are." He bent his head, his lips brushing my temple. "I never knew," he murmured, "what a home felt like. Not really. Not until you." Lily, seeing us, squealed with delight and came toddling toward us, her arms outstretched. "Mama, Dada!" Dante moved from behind me and knelt, catching her as she half ran, half fell into his arms. He lifted her high into the air, and her joyous laughter filled the garden. He looked at me over her head, his gray eyes shining with a love and contentment that mirrored my own. In the heart of a dangerous world, surrounded by walls of wealth and power, we had found our improbable peace. I was no longer a damsel in distress, and he was more than an anti-hero. We were a family, and we were finally home.